Hi guys, so today I'm going to compare the novel It by Stephen King to the film adaptation that was released earlier this month. I read the novel earlier this year and I included it in my video of my favourite books so far in 2017, which I'll link in the description. Clearly I did really enjoy the novel, which is just as well because it's an absolute tome of a book at about 1200 pages. And I just want to preface this video by saying that I do really appreciate both books and films. I studied English literature and film studies at university, which isn't me trying to say I'm any type of authority on either of them, but just to say that I do appreciate both mediums almost equally, although my deepest love does lie with books. I usually don't find it very helpful to put book versus film because films have to make a lot of stylistic choices when they're adapting a book, and they have different types of budget and time constraints. I'm usually quite generous with film adaptations of books, and I try and go into them with an open mind and to view them as their own entity. So from the out, my purpose here isn't really to say whether this is a good adaptation of the book, but just to explore the ways in which they're similar and they're different. I'm not going to have any big spoilers in this video, so if you've still not read or watched the book or film, you can still absolutely watch this video, but if you'd rather know nothing before going into either of them, then I hope you aren't watching this to start with. Firstly, I think the most striking difference between the film and the book is the structure. So the film follows a group of young kids who are being hunted by a shape-shifting monster, and it progresses entirely chronologically in their efforts to survive and to hunt down this creature. The book works differently, with the structure alternating between sections of them as children and sections of them as adults returning to their hometown to deal with the issue once and for all. Now, I do understand why the film chose to do this, because the novel is so sprawling that it would have been realistically impossible to merge both aspects of it into a single film. There's a second instalment of the film planned, which will supposedly follow them as adults and intersperse flashbacks of them as children. Dealing with such an unwieldy and expansive novel is no mean feat, and I think they did make the right decision to both retain faithfulness to the original narrative and transpose it into the cinema in a way that feasibly works. I do think the films will lose some of the nuance of the books in doing this, however. The structure of the narrative in the book made the reveal of information paced in a very controlled manner. Writing such a long novel, pacing is absolutely key, and I think Stephen King nailed it in the book. By putting the kid's story first and the adult story afterwards, it disrupts this flow of information because everything crucial is revealed to us in the first film, and I think it runs the risk of the sequel being a bit of a redundant sequel like a Halloween 2 or a Poltergeist 2, whereby the monster returns for the sole reason of creating fodder for a money-spinning sequel. This is quite a cynical view, and having read the book, I know that the adult story is so intertwined with the kid's story that it's not truly over until you've seen both parts. But for someone who's just watched the film and hasn't read the book, I can understand how they might see it just as a marketing ploy. I was really interested to see how the film would represent the kids, because of course they are at the absolute heart of both book and film. I thought Stephen King managed to really capture the unique vernacular of 13-year-old boys really well in his novel, because he really gets their immaturity and their childishness and their vulgarity, but also their desire to be grown up and to be accepted, to be brave. I think the film did it really well. I thought the kids were all really good actors, the script was realistic, and it stayed true to the tone of the 80s without seeming too aged. The group dynamic is so important in the book, and I did think they managed to retain that quite well in the film. It would have been nice to see a bit more of some of the individual characters, and especially their home life, because that was one aspect of the book that I really enjoyed, seeing their domestic situations and the individual problems they encountered at home. But I understand that time constraints meant that wasn't possible for all of the characters in the film. There are more central characters than usual for this type of book or film, but with such a long novel you get to really know them all intimately in a way that the film didn't really have the liberty to do with just over a 2-hour runtime. So instead they chose to focus on just a couple of the main characters: Beverly, Richie played by Finn Wolfhard of Stranger Things fame, and Bill. It would have been nice to get a little bit more character insight into some of the other boys, but all things considered, I think the filmmakers did a really good job of knowing what to keep in and what to discard. Of course, one of the most central characters in It is Pennywise the Clown, and I think that was probably one of the trickiest decisions for the filmmakers, choosing how to represent him. Clowns are now such an overdone horror antagonist that it can be hard to make them truly terrifying rather than just unintentionally comic. Stephen King does a really good job of describing an absolutely terrifying clown, but he's in a privileged position where he can rely on the reader's imagination to fill in the gaps and create something that is truly horrifying, at least in my experience of reading it. I thought Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise was excellent in the film. He was exceptionally creepy and his makeup and costume were genuinely frightening. The other manifestations of Pennywise were equally disgusting and frightening, and I could really see resemblances to the director Muschietti's previous horror film Mama. I think it's an inevitability in films like this where the visual reality of the monster is never quite as terrifying as the imagined horror, and I think that definitely is the case with this film as well. My experience of reading it was more scary because my imagination can create more horrifying things than even the best CGI. Of course, there are things that a film has the opportunity of introducing that a book can't do, and one example of that in this film was the music, which I thought was excellent. It's an incredibly creepy and atmospheric story, and Stephen King manages to create that atmosphere through his masterful prose, but the music really helped set this tone throughout the film. I can only imagine how difficult it was to create a film out of this hugely renowned and adored book in a way that both satisfies Stephen King fans but also creates a work of art that stands on its own 2 feet, and I think it was really successful. I found it genuinely scary, but it also held on to the core themes of the novel, which to me at least were childhood, growing up and friendship. If you've seen it, whether or not you've read the book, I'd really like to know what you thought of it. But I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you next time. Bye!